Hello, hi everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you all for being very early, and we will wait for more people to stream in, and we will start at 5 p.m. sharp. So, we do this webinar once every month at the last Friday of the week, where we discuss about wellness related topics led by our guest speaker, which I will introduce shortly. So we will have a short Q&A at the end of the talk where we will address your questions. So for now, please enjoy your time as we wait for the rest of the remaining participants. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. For those who just came in, thank you for being early still. And we will wait for more people to stream in, and we will start at 5 p.m. sharp. So we do this webinar once every month at the last Friday of every month, where we discuss about wellness related topics led by our guest speaker, which I will introduce shortly. Once again, we will have a short Q&A session at the end of the talk where we will discuss and address your questions. So for now, please enjoy your time as we wait for the rest of the remaining participants. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm glad to see that all of us here are eager to learn, even when it is on a Friday evening. So we have this talk every month at the last Friday of the month, where we discuss about wellness-related topics, especially in the workplace. My name is Patrick, and I'm your host for today. Our topic for today is understanding cultural intelligence difference and learning how to thrive in a multicultural workplace. Today, we will have our guest speaker, Mr. Kai Peng, a social psychologist and counselor. So without further ado, I'll hand over my time to you, Mr. Kai Peng.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So the topic today that we'll be discussing is cultural differences in a globalizing society. Okay. So to understand this topic, we first need to understand what is culture. So how do we define culture? Culture is a collection of the ideas, custom, and social behavior of a particular group of society. This is the Oxford Dictionary definition. And this also includes other aspects such as age, ethnicity, race, national culture, corporate culture, and popular culture. So in essence, it is the sort of a group behavior that a particular group of people exhibit. So this can include many different elements. Just going back to the first slide, these are some other major elements that are included. But for the purposes of today's webinar, we'll be concentrating on the following points. So other factors in cultures, here we have languages, festivals, rituals, ceremonies, holidays, pastimes, food, architecture, music, lifestyle, and the big ones are religions and beliefs. So norms as well. So I would like to emphasize a little bit on norms, because norms are sort of informal, unwritten rules that have social behavior. So a small example for a norm in Singapore is that, for example, we go to a hawker center. This is very specific Singaporean. So we place our tissue papers or maybe even our phone. Some of us there do that on the seats to sort of reserve the seats and say that this is my seat. This is often a very Singaporean norm that's not exhibited, to my knowledge, anywhere else in the world. Okay, moving on. So the other part, the word globalizing. So the next part to encompass this topic is to understand what is globalizing. So globalizing is integrating worldwide government policies, cultures and societies, social movements, and financial markets through the trade and exchange of ideas. This is done typically today because transport is much easier. For example, the US to Singapore is, I believe, is an 18-hour flight. I could be wrong about that. And of course, the internet is nearly instantaneous. So this makes the exchange of ideas, cultures and society much more accessible than in the past, especially nowadays when our internet is getting faster and faster. And nowadays that everyone has discovered Zoom is very handy for meetings and such. Okay, next slide. So before we continue, I'd like to talk about the general culture in Singapore. So why is Singapore so unique? So Singapore is what they call the gateway to Asia, where the East meets the West, made out of Chinese and Malay and other various ethnicities. And we mix our cultural heritage, but we keep it independent as well. So we have a very distinct Chinese heritage, and we have a very distinct Malay heritage. And it's but we do coexist without strife. So other things, sorry, just to elaborate on it a little bit. So one thing of why Singapore is so special, East meets West, is because of the media we consume in Singapore. So the medium of which we communicate in Singapore is English. And as such, a lot of the media we consume is English, which is mostly produced by Western media. However, because of our geographic location in the East, we also have many Eastern influences. For example, our traditional wear for the Chinese is very distinctly Chinese, well, should I say Chinese, but yes, very not so Western influence. But at the same time, when we take a look at weddings, many of us do have very Western type weddings, whereas in the church, suit and your marriage gown. But at the same time, we have things such as Malay weddings, where it's very traditional as well. So it's a very East meets West kind of location, where we have a very mix of East and West ideas. So to understand, to understand, I just received one of the Q&A. To understand a little bit more about what makes up culture, we must first understand what makes up an individual. So an individual is made out of the following things. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So an individual is made out of one's beliefs, values, norms, and culture. So we can see there's a few things inside. For example, at the top here, there's some things you cannot change about yourself. For example, your genetical predisposition. So this includes your DNA, genes, your physical being, so how tall you are, things like that, and your hereditary. So things that you might inherit from your parents, such as health conditions and well, same thing, your height, etc. So the norms you believe in is very much shaped. So your beliefs, such as your parents, the norms such as that your parents give you, caregivers or family of origin, is very influenced by the norms of which the society you grow up in. For example, the way that Eastern parents compared to Western parents. So the individual is made up of a lot of what they feel, what they think, what they act, and what they see. So, and naturally, the culture is influenced by the media, the digital world, which now is globalizing. So there's a very mix of what's happening in that aspect, your lifestyle and your friends. So the general belief of this group of people. So what are the concerns of an individual? So within a culture, each culture is made of individuals, but within each individual, there are different concerns of which you can measure. So the four main things a person is typically concerned about is wealth, health, ability, and time, WHAT. So, but within different cultures, this is weighed differently, which we will go in through shortly. So just to define these terms a little bit, wealth is in relation to one's income, assets, and liabilities, okay? Investment savings as well. So health includes both physical, mental, and emotional health. Ability means your skills, your skill set, your ability to do certain actions. For example, your professional competencies. Perhaps your education as well is included in this category. So time. So time, how much one values their own time in relation to perhaps someone else's time. We'll go to that in a bit, just a little bit. So from there, there are four more. When you compare these things to these other four things, the WHAT, you compare it to these four Fs. So within these four Fs, you have your family, your future, your finances, and your fitness. So just to define these terms a little bit, family is self-explanatory. Future is in regards of your future plans. And finances in regards of your wealth finance, and fitness is also related to health. So why do I have two of these statements? I'm very sure most of you see that it's quite similar. It's because we can actually compare the two in such a way. So when you look at an individual, you should have something like this in your mind. Okay, here's an example of what one of these things might look like. So let's just look at an example, for example, family, finances, and wealth. So what's the current state of my finances? But let's say family and wealth. Another category is how are my current financial commitments towards my family? What's my current financial situation within my family? And for example, wealth and fitness. What's my financial state right now towards my health? Maybe mental and physical, maybe as things like that. So when you imagine a person, you need to measure these things. Then you can look at them, how this person will function within your current culture. So let's go through the main kind of cultures that exist within different societies. So within the East and the West first. But first, the main things that all of us have to deal with in a workplace. So the first cultural difference I'd like to go through is a cultural difference in age. So I'm sure many of you have experienced sort of the Gen Z versus perhaps a millennial or even boomer type mentality. So here is something that a great man once said, Mr. Socrates. So he said this in 469 BC, so around that time period. So the children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for the authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize their teachers. So this has always been the case where there is a huge cultural difference between what the young people want and what perhaps the older generation want. So some of you were wondering, why is this so? Why is there such a cultural difference? So let's look at this next picture for time. So generally across all of time, this is the young person, a middle-aged person, and an old person. This is their time, money, and energy. As such, as we can see just from this, as such, their needs will be different. What they're seeking will be different. For example, a young person has a lot of time and has a lot of energy. He will be looking after money, so he'll be pursuing money. Now, the reason of which he pursues money may be vastly different, but generally, they will be pursuing finances and money for one reason or another that we'll go through later. A middle-aged person, now very engrossed with work, he's settled in his company, he's settled with his full-time job, will be more preoccupied with time. So finding time to spend, regardless of what it is, either in terms of time, in terms of family, finances, or other such things that he might want to spend time on. And he has money and energy because he's now settled in his full-time job. Now the elderly, now they have a lot of free time left because they are retired. They have a lot of time, a lot of money, but now not so much energy because they're a bit older now. So one more thing that's not included in this picture is the thing of ability. So ability generally increases over time. However, the rate of which the ability increases depends on the individual's intelligence, the ability to pick up a skill, how quickly, and how much the individual wants to pick up that skill. Moving on. So popular culture. The next thing I'd like to go through briefly. So what is popular culture? Popular culture is what the majority of population finds attractive. So this is influence on what gives the most money. So for example, nowadays, TikTok is very popular. Why? Because technology is very accessible. The youth use it a lot, and the youth are the ones with the most time. So they do produce a lot of the content. If you look at this, the youth has the most time. So they produce a lot of the content. That's why it seems a bit skewed to the youth, because they have the most time to produce content on such platforms. And it gives, when I mentioned most money also, so a company is trying to sell a product, they will likely sell to the largest base possible. That's why I mentioned that a product or a source of service will be aimed at what gives them the most money. And this develops a popular culture because it's according to everyone's, the majority needs. Moving on. So the main topic for today, Eastern and Western differences. So the East and the West has vastly different cultures. And the two different ways I'd like to compare it today is firstly through collective and individualistic cultures. So I like to mention that Singapore is a mix of this, but largely speaking, the East and the West are broke according to these lines. So in individualistic cultures, people behave according to self-interest and personal preferences, considering independence and self-sufficiency above the group. Example of these countries are Japan, Korea, and China. Or you can take most Eastern countries as well. Thailand, Cambodia, all of these are collectivistic culture. Sorry, this is the other way around. Yeah, sorry, apologies. There's a mistake in this slide. Individualistic cultures are more of United States, Canada, and Europe. This is an error. Please ignore this for the moment. So just to so people who value self-interest and personal preferences are people typically in the West. This is a mistake once again. So examples are United States of America, Canada, and Europe. So in collectivistic cultures, groups of primary importance, the groups are of primary importance. So they prioritize the group over the individual. So example of this is Japan, Korea, and China. So let me give you an example to make this more, let me give you an example of this. So let's say you are at work. So let's look at the time of the theme of money. So just now we mentioned finances. So finances, an individual in an individual culture will think of finances as a way to achieve what they want. For example, I must get money so that I can do, let's say, go on a holiday I want, or I can get this thing I want, I can buy this thing I want. However, individual in the collectivistic culture is more likely to think of it as a way as, oh, I must get money so that my family will be, I can look after my family and look after our shared interests together. For example, perhaps the house needs repairs. An example like that. So one thing I'd like to mention as well is the paradigm of health. So in an individualistic culture, for example, you have a worker from the Americas. Let's say they are in a group project. he is less likely to say, oh, I'm going to put in overtime so that we can complete the project earlier on time. Or he's less likely to say, oh, even though I feel burnt out, I need to continue so that the group project may finish if it's not aligned with their KPI, our key performance index, apologies. But in a collectivistic culture, let's say we're working in a group project together, either in school or at work, you're more likely to say, oh, I better push myself so that I can meet the group's expectation. So that's another example of that. So let's move on. The next aspect of which we can compare it to is a high context culture and a low context culture. So this comes to the way of which the cultures tend to communicate. A high context culture typically refers to Eastern countries, while a low context culture often refers to Western countries. So let's go through what a high context culture is first. So in high context cultures, such as Japan and China, they rely on more indirect and non-verbal communication. So non-verbal communication is sort of things that are implied. For example, I tell you, in just a moment, think of an example. I don't respond to your text, perhaps. In a high context culture, this will be implied as, oh, he doesn't want to speak to me. He does not like me in some way. So a simple not responding to a text. So these cultures will prefer to maintain an overall harmony and avoid conflict at all costs. In fact, this is because Asian cultures are built on Confucius' notion on harmony and strict hierarchy. Okay, so and it also has a lot of this thing to do of losing face, or as the Chinese call yulian. So the concept of losing face is the core of a Chinese culture, where losing face means that you lose your social standing in a particular group, or your reputation has been damaged in some way. So it comes to the thing of ability now. This comes back to the paradigm of ability. So ability in high context culture, ability, one of the things is criticism. Criticism, you will not do it in a high context culture because it is seen as, first thing, you are being insubordinate. You're questioning your leadership. If you're of a lower position, you're questioning the person's competency. You're questioning the person's ability to perform well, and you're questioning the person's thought process. That's what you're doing when you're criticizing a person in a high context culture. You're not just criticizing the idea itself, you're criticizing the person directly. Okay? That's what happens when you criticize someone in a high context culture. That's the thought process. Okay, so in the next one, we have the idea of low context culture. So in a low context culture, such as Germany, US, Australia, they rely on very direct way of communication. For example, when I criticize you on an idea, I'm just criticizing the idea and not you as a person. So just the idea itself. So generally, cultures with Western or European roots are generally considered to be low context cultures. They'll speak openly and accept very public displays of emotion. For example, I'm frustrated. A person will more freely express their frustrated, anger, or even happy at a certain idea. Okay. So, moving on for now. So, the next thing we'll be going through today. Sorry, this is just an image of an example of a low context culture versus a high context culture. So, what I say in a low context culture, what I say is exactly what I mean. I have no hidden agenda. And in a high context culture, I'll need you to sort of realize the implied meaning of what I said. So there are clear messages. In a low context culture, there are clear messages, no room for interpretation, and explicit communication. Okay? So one thing that's very important in high context culture is that there's a lot of non-verbal cues as well. So a lot of implied meanings, or perhaps a lot of reading a lot of their body language as well. So if they're comfortable or uncomfortable, then something. With something. Hold on. So here is how the East and the West views ability. So one very important thing that we need to mind in the workplace is when someone asks questions. So a question, when in the West, it's very standard that they ask you questions about, let's say, a project. In fact, even if you're in leadership and they are of a lower position, they will still ask you questions such as, oh, is this a good idea? Is there another way to approach this? Or if they'll even freely say, I don't think this is a good idea. And this is simply because they want to advance the idea. They want to advance the idea in total. So it is expected that lower ranking, in fact, in Western cultures, it's expected that lower ranking employees shows initiative by understanding the topics, understanding and explaining the key topics by asking about them. Employees are encouraged to ask questions, even if these may be challenging to the ideas and actions of their superiors. So, an example like that just now, they also show questions as a way of, oh, I understand what you are talking about. Here's a question so that I may know more about what you're talking about. So that's their thought process when they are asking questions, when a Western person asks questions. In the East, things tend to work a little differently. Employees will feel a little intimidated by the idea of asking questions. So, for example, if in Eastern culture I ask questions like, oh, how does this thing work? The employees might feel that, oh, you're testing my knowledge about this certain topic. It's not that you're trying to know more, it's that you're testing my knowledge to see if I actually do know what I'm talking about. Okay, so as well, a person at a lower position may also fear that when they're asking a question, that the superior might be the superior might see it as a lack of competency. So, for example, I ask, oh, how does this machine work, or how should I do this paperwork? You'll see that the superior might see, oh, that this person has no idea what he's doing. Something like that. Okay, so moving on. So that's how we view ability. One other thing about ability is that people in the East typically view ability as something very important, very core to represent the group rather than to represent the individual. For example, I must be very good, I must attain a degree so that my family does not so that I can make my family proud. I must get a very good job. I must show that I am good at these things so that I do not shame the family or the group that I belong to. For example, at a company event as well, he or she might feel a person in the East might feel very pressured to represent the company well instead of representing themselves. To show their individual competency, they'll be more preoccupied with showing that the company is good. So this is how people in the East and the West view time differently. So in the West, people will try, so this is regards to punctuality. So people in the West tends, especially nowadays, because for 2 years we will work from home. So this has a small side effect of now they're more used to flexible hours, and because in other countries they have to travel long distances, not like Singapore where we have a very extensive transportation system. The West people are more used to flexible hours and remote working. So in this context, so long as they get the work done, meetings are attended, and there's no issue with whichever work they're doing, everybody will be okay. Everybody will be okay with it, from the superiors down to the subordinates. Everybody will okay with the arrangement, so long as work is done on time and there's no problem with the work they are doing. But in the East, there's this special little phenomenon that's going on, that people of lower rank or subordinates are often expected to be perfectly on time, or in the case earlier, so that those of higher rank may wish to start if those of higher rank wish to start earlier. People in the East also tend to start meetings or perhaps work functions with a bit of socializing and exchange of words. So simple like, oh, how's your family doing? How's your company doing, etc. So this is to sort of socialize a little bit just before the meeting. This is actually does not happen in the West very much, where once you are in the meeting, you are here to talk exactly what the meeting is about. So, socially, however, in both contexts, Eastern and Western people both expect you to be on time. Is a show of you value my time and that you respect me as an individual. This is a basic expectation of societies everywhere. So Mm, yes, they chit chat just a little bit, but it's quite sorry, just to address a question that Mr. John has mentioned. He actually mentioned that in France, people do tend to sit down and sorry, they tend to shake hands and sit down. Yes, basic introductions are in order in both cultures. I should go back just a little bit. To sort of elaborate on this a little bit, in the West and the East, basic introductions and greetings are there. But however, the extent of which and how long it lasts is much more in the East. For example, the duration of which it lasts, this sort of little socializing happens in the East is much longer than that of the West. Okay. So in terms of authority, so East and the West, how they view authority. So in the East, it is very rigid. You are not allowed to question those above you. And the ranking of a person really means something. So the guys at the top always have the final word, and the system of which you participate in, the hierarchy of which you participate is very, very important. For example, you should not question your managers. You should always follow what your superior says without question, because they should know better in some way. So that's thought process in the East. So people seldom violate chains of command or openly question decisions by their superiors. Okay. In the West, hierarchies tend to be relatively flat. So you should feel comfortable with talking about the idea of, or even the CEO of the company without issue. So talking about perhaps your concerns about certain project or work issue, or people in higher positions will try to help their subordinates feel there's a sense of equality amongst the team. Okay, so moving on to the next one, this is how they view authority. So this is a very interesting paradigm between the difference between the Eastern and Western views on health. So the West people tend to divide the problem from the person. For example, if you are sick, right, it's most likely that you caught a bug or some external influence made you sick. For example, let's say Western person says, oh, you probably got that cough when you went out, or it's probably flu season, something along those lines. However, Eastern person, when you do get sick, we've all heard that, oh, you should drink more water, oh, you shouldn't eat so much fried food. It's something with your lifestyle that is the issue that has caused you to be sick. While the Western approach is something externally has caused you to be sick. It's nothing wrong with your lifestyle. So last difference is mental health, the view on mental health. So in the West, they do tend to take mental health quite seriously. They're even given offs and leaves if your supervisor feels that you're not mentally well. However, in the East, in Singapore, is a bit of an exception where we are starting to see we are starting to give more leeway and understanding more about mental health. But generally in the East, if you do have a mental health problem, you are seen as weak or something wrong with the individual, that something wrong with you as a person that has caused you to have developed such a problem. Okay. So one small thing I would like to mention, one small topic I'd like to mention is the culture, the corporate culture between MNCs, multinational companies, and small medium enterprises. So as we know, now in the work culture, we often have people crossing over to different types of corporate environments. As such, we do interact with people who are previously from SMEs or people who are previously on MNCs. So their view of how they proceed work is vastly different. And as such, we should understand the differences between these two work environments. So one key difference in the MNC is that they tend to offer their employees more resources. For example, higher salaries, bonus, and perks. They also tend to contribute more to the individual's training. There's a very strict regimen and requirement. For example, you want to go up a position, you must have attended these few trainings, or you must have these few diplomas, diploma certificates, etc., before you may take the next position. A very strict hierarchy as well. So internal training, so MNCs conduct internal training as well as outside professional development, such as sending employees overseas and for overseas conferences, training sessions, so they may develop new skills through that way. So the next point, so once again, the MNC is an obvious structure. So obvious structure and hierarchy and clear-cut procedures in place. So let's say I want to apply for leave, or let's say I want to apply for perhaps a pay raise. There's a very strict procedure you can do in order to do that. While with a SME, it's not so clear-cut most of the time. Okay, in a SME, employees have to be in regular collaboration with other departments. So when I say this, I'm not saying that MNCs don't have this, but it's more of employees of all levels, from the subordinate level to the ground worker, all the way up to the head managers. They'll all be in contact with different departments, so it's not siloed. And they often have their hand in many different roles. For example, a person in sales in a small medium enterprise might also be involved in product development or even customer service because the company does not have so many people to specialize. And as such, this also gives the person some more hands-on experience and gives more space for creativity. It's also a chance for a person also often is stretched a lot to learn all the different skills. So in that sense, it's more stressful to be in this position than to be in an MNC, because in MNC, you are very siloed. You know exactly what's your job. But an SME is not so clear-cut. So small companies often have more flexible, are more flexible in how projects are carried out. Okay, so long as it is implemented fast and efficiently, is more acceptable most of the time. And typically, small companies have flexible scheduling and working from home. Typically, nowadays, we are all MNCs request their employees to return to the work because they have a designated office space, and they believe the productivity is higher. So, why do we need to mind cultural differences? So, when we do not mind cultural differences, this leads to what we call microaggressions. So microaggressions are small little remarks that you yourself might not know are offensive. So for example, I ever had an employee recently, he mentioned to me, I had an employee from, I believe, Thailand. Another employee mentioned to him that, oh, people from Thailand are always like this, just as a casual remark. So things like this, or something along like, oh, older people are like this, or oh, the younger generation is like this. So these are examples of microaggression. So you might not know it, someone might take offense to this, but someone else will. For example, if someone were to tell me, oh, people from Singapore are always like this, you'll be on mind like, oh, what does that even mean? What do you mean by that? Are you like looking down on me or something like that? So this often leads to tension. And let's say you have tension between departments now, this leads to a loss of productivity and corporate cohesiveness. So in big examples, we have cultural conflicts. For example, the Little India riots a while ago, because of a cultural misunderstanding, this leads to riots in a macro society point of view. So this in turn also leads to failure to integrate certain groups. So if we look at this example, we can look at Sweden as an example. So Sweden is taking in a lot of immigrants, and the immigrants are not integrating well. As such, now they have different sort of pockets of cultures in Sweden instead of having one cohesive culture. And this once again leads to cultural conflict. And this also leads to hate and prejudice towards a certain culture. So the last point of why do we need cultural understanding is that cultural understanding, well, you can avoid conflict, but the main benefit is that it leads to a different ways of thinking how to solve a problem. For example, a person in the East, a person in the West, how they go about thinking to solve a problem might be different. And as such, these differences, as a leader, you can look at these differences, compare and perhaps contrast the different advantages and disadvantages, and make a better plan, because you have different people thinking about how they would solve the problem differently. Okay, so what can I do to learn more about another person? So if you want to learn more on another person, you can remember this acronym AEIOD. So you can ask, simple, evaluate. So evaluate the answer. So investigate the answer. So perhaps look online, or perhaps ask more. Investigate what the answer means. Observe how the person acts and understand what. And finally, the last step is to finally understand what the person is talking about. So thank you for your time. I'll be taking questions now along with your feedback. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kaifeng, for that insightful sharing. So to everyone, please fill in the feedback by scanning or putting in the link that is displayed on the screen. If you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A section at Zoom. Mr. Kaipeng, maybe we can start with the question in the Q&A. They're asking, is there an overview of the key pointers or takeaways from the session that could be shared?
I shall develop one, and if you do want it, so I'll be developing this in the future. So if you do want it, you could leave me your contact. I'll email it to you.
Another one asks, where do you get these data from?
So
yeah.
Also, this data I carry it from news sources as well as research papers. I can give you the citations if needed. But I understand that some of you understand that there may be exceptions to what I've gone through, and that is fine because what I'm going through is the general rule rather than encompassing everything. So I do understand the point where, oh, but there's this exception to it, and that's yes, there are some exceptions, but generally this is the rule we follow when I apply these thought processes.
And I think what you brought up at the very end is very important, which is the AEIOU, for us to get a better understanding of what the person or the person we're trying to work with is actually like. Are there any more questions?
Are there metrics to sorry.
Yeah, please go. Please go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So are there any metrics to measure cultural awareness? Not that I'm totally aware of, but there are ways to raise cultural awareness. For example, there are many workshops such as cultural sensitivity training that your employees can attend. So some action items. So for example, here's one thing you can do. So for example, if you do know that there's some cultural conflict within your organization, so your employees can know this basic so for example, how to measure a person. So you have your WHAT as went through just now, and the 4Fs. And lastly, if your employee or you yourself are having some issues understanding cultural differences, you may sort of use this first. Yes, there's a culture in the workplace questionnaire, but the exact metric, there is a questionnaire, but the metric is I hesitate to give that out because it's yet to be, how to say, widely, yeah, apologies.
Can we go back to the feedback form link?
Yeah.
So again, to anyone who have questions, you can put it in the chat or you can put it in the Q&A box. If not, then can we please ask for your help to fill in our feedback form so that we may know better what type of topics that you may like. You can give us feedback about this current webinar that we're holding right now. Thank you very much. Maybe the question that someone asked here, maybe we can rephrase it to how are we supposed to use this information? So when we find a certain type of a character with a certain type of culture, how do we go about it? Okay,
so the first thing is to understand, firstly, are they from a collectivistic or individualistic culture? So you can look, you naturally look at a person as an individual, but to understand a person as an individual, you must first put them into groups of which you can understand it more broadly, I feel. Although people may reject this idea, but we do belong to a larger culture, and this larger culture do, sorry, would it be this one? In this larger culture, it does imply certain things about the individual, but naturally, an individual is unique. They may have some traits. For example, generally, people from collectivistic cultures think of the group first before themselves. But to really make sure that's the case, you can use the following steps. Okay, so one person asked, what kind of questions would be useful to add into employee satisfaction survey when they want us to suss out unhappiness among foreign and local staff? Yet, we need to be careful of cultural differences and not want to trigger certain impressions. Thank you. Okay, that's a very excellent question. Give me just one moment to read it one more time, just to make sure I'm getting it correct. Okay, so naturally, this kind of question, because you're not sure what you're expecting. So first thing, the question should be open-ended, but it should also be specifically open-ended. So you can be very straightforward. Let me think for just a moment. What do you enjoy? Sorry. Okay, so you can start with something. What do you enjoy about working with non-Singaporeans? Or inversely, you can write. Other than that, you can say what are some things you do not enjoy about working about some for non-Singaporeans. So naturally, you don't want because I understand how this can be offensive. Like, oh, what do you mean? You're meaning that we are different? And the answer is yes, you are different. Culturally, we are different. And these questions are more straightforward, but to the point. And inversely, you can, if you do have foreign workers, you can simply ask them the opposite. And lastly, the last question, third question is, would you like to know more? What would you like to know more about working with other people from different cultures or non-Singaporeans in the case? And the opposite, you can simply ask the opposite for non-Singaporeans.
Thank you for that question. There's another one. How do we handle a person who approaches towards us with different cultures without hurting them?
Very good question. So this is actually a tricky thing because it requires mutual understanding. So the first thing you need to do is to assure them, oh, I'm not malicious. I truly don't understand your culture. So the way to establish that is, casual talk first. And the first thing you do is you establish the sense of genuineness, that you are genuinely looking to know more about that person. So there's a level of complexity of, let's say you are supervisor to a person, but let's assume that, let's say you are equal to the said person in our culture. So you can simply start with, oh, I understand you are from this and this place or this country, and I find it really interesting. And I heard that you do XYZ thing there. Like, I don't quite understand it. Like, or maybe not in that exact language, but I find it interesting, but I can't quite understand it. Could you explain it a bit more to me? So here we can follow our AEIOU, although there's one step above of establishing genuineness or establishing trust. After that, you ask in such a way, and then based on what they say, you evaluate what they say. So let's say they give you an answer, then you perhaps look it up online, like, oh, what do they do in this country, perhaps? And then you observe, you change your behavior, perhaps you change your behavior, or perhaps you educate them if you are a supervisor. Oh, here in this company or in this country, people tend to do this particular behavior. It's not meant to be offensive, it's just how we do things. And it's not meant to offend you in any way. I would just like to bring this up with you to you.
Thank you for that question. If I may ask Mr. Kaipang, to follow up from that question, how would you advise is the best way to handle when a cultural misunderstanding had already happened? How would you?
Yeah. Okay, so let's say a cultural misunderstanding had already happened. So, let's say a Western person. Let's give a more concrete. Oh no, let's not give an exact example. Give me a moment to think of a general answer that can be applied to most situations. Okay, generally, you want to ask these two people to sit down, although it may be very confrontational at first, but the degree of which it affects the workforce is very important. So let's say it's a big cultural misunderstanding that causes a lot of strife. So generally, you like to sit the two parties down first, and they'll like to discuss it from their point of view. Because when you ask them to both, you'll sit them both down and say, okay, what were you thinking when this happened? What was your intention? So for understanding each other's intention, from there, you'll understand what they were trying to do. For example, in the case of questioning, so for example, a Western person comes in, okay, for example, a Western person comes in and says, oh, he questions his superior a lot, and the superior finds it like, oh, this guy has no idea what he's doing. So you sit those two people down, and the Western person says, oh no, actually I'm just trying to find out more about what I'm supposed, I'm just trying to find out more. I understand this, I'm trying to find out more. And that Eastern person from East will sit down and says, oh, actually, I was upset at you because I thought you were incompetent because you asked so many questions. From there, both of them will understand that, oh, actually it's just because this was his intention. I assumed the intention wrongly, and the problem should be solved from there. The most of the time is because we come in with certain assumptions when a person does a certain action, and these certain assumptions are wrong in a cultural, are from different points of view in a cultural aspect. Okay, next question. Hi, I would like to seek your perspective on LGBTQ plus groups from different cultures, e.g. LGBT from the West versus LGBT from the East, and our latest highlight from the government. Very interesting topic, current affairs. Okay, so just to summarize the issue briefly, recently the government wanted to repeal 372A. Maybe I believe I'm getting the number incorrectly, but yeah, one of the laws regarding LGBT relations. 377A. Thank you very much, Lina Chen. Okay, so a lot of questions. Please give me just a moment. So you'll notice LGBT from the West versus LGBT to the East. So I'm going to speak specifically in the Singapore context because I assume we are working in such an environment for now. So LGBT in Singapore are typically more closeted or quiet about their lifestyle because it's literally illegal, while a West person is typically more open about it. And as I understand from our point of view, we might be very uncomfortable with like a person openly expressing his how should I say, sexuality. And you can think of it as a way of, will a straight person, or let's say a straight person or a heterosexual person, be talking about it in such a manner? The best way to think about it is everyone can go overboard when talking about heterosexual relationships. And it's the same thing, everybody can go overboard when talking about homosexual relationships as well as heterosexual relationships. So you do a one-to-one comparison. Okay, is this normal if a person is talking about a heterosexual relationship? So I know it can be sensitive to a point where, oh, I can't criticizing because that was seen as homophobic. But you compare it one-to-one in a heterosexual relationship, is this appropriate? And in that case, right, if it's not appropriate, let's say in a heterosexual context, a one-to-one comparison, then it's not appropriate in a homosexual context. Okay. When there's unspoken unhappiness in MNC, how should we approach, find out what are the group sentiments on the ground? Curious about the way to gather sentiments. This can be a bit tricky, but the most important thing about, let me reread the question. I noticed I've mumbled it. So the question, where there is unspoken unhappiness in an MNC, how should we approach and find out what's the sentiments on the ground? Curious about the way to gather sentiments. Thank you again. So the number one thing in an MNC is that they must be able to do it anonymously. Because if they put, I'm unhappy about this certain group of people, and their name is right there, they're never going to do it. So the number one most important thing is, no matter which culture they're from is, they must be able to do this anonymously. People feel more comfortable, even in Western cultures. People feel more comfortable with sharing, as sharing a general sentiment. So first thing is to do it anonymously and find a way to gather data anonymously. So this can be done through a web page, and very simple, open. The most important part, once again, is open-ended questions about the certain topic that is causing unhappiness. So specific OAQ questions that can be done anonymously would be a good way to go about it. So next question, not so much a question, more of a personal approach. When meeting people from different backgrounds, I use empathy in combination with the AIO concept. And an anonymous English writer referred to empathy as follows: one must see with the other person's eye, hear with his ears, and feel with his heart. Yes, okay. So Very, very good point. I would like to add on a little bit on this. So on top of empathy, right, there's this concept of, I mentioned, genuineness. So you must approach the situation as, oh, I genuinely do not mean to cause you offense, and I'm not questioning your lifestyle, I'm not questioning you as a person, but I don't know what this is about, and I wish to learn more. And the important part is not only you think that, but the other person must feel that. And that's a very important skill when approaching multicultural issues. Thank you very much for that statement. It's very helpful.
Thank you for the questions. Do we have any more questions? Any last minute ones? No. Mr. Kaipeng, can you please shift to the slide for forms?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yes. So sorry. Please.
Yeah. All right. So once again, everyone, please do fill out our forms. This will help us immensely because we will be able to know what type of topics that you want to listen to and how we can help you develop the knowledge and hopefully skills as well to tackle your own problems. So once again, are there any last minute questions? If not, then thank you so much for coming in and participating in today. Thank you so much, Mr. Kaipeng, for spending your time with us and sharing us a lot about cultural differences and how we should approach it.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Hope you attend the webinar again. Thank you. Thank you for your attendance today.
All right, this is the end of our webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, and hope to see you again next month.